Now, I know the hardest part about something like training for a marathon is just knowing where to get started. That's why I've come up with 3 main things that I think are really helpful to get you past that sticking point and actually signing up. The first thing is that gear is not super important right now. The main gear you need to worry about is just having a decent pair of running shoes and some comfortable clothes to run in so that you actually want to get outside and go on your first run. Second is finding your motivation. You know, a lot of people have plenty of different reasons why they might want to run. And motivation is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but I really like to break motivation down into one thing, and that's your why. And a lot of people say that too, but they don't really know how to apply that. For me, I found out that my why is that I don't feel the same level of commitment and gratification from anything unless it's a really big goal that I believe is beyond my current abilities, and I actually do everything I can to meet that goal. So you researching, doing a video like this, watching me explain to you how to get started, that is a great first step to pushing yourself into finding that why. But the third thing that I wanted to talk about is pacing. Especially even later in training, this is still applicable. But in the early training, pacing is probably the #1 most important thing. You need to run your runs a lot slower than what feels like working hard. And the reason this works, we'll talk more about in the kind of physical adaptations part of the video, but as a little short summary, the reason you need to run a little bit slower is because your body takes a lot of time to develop those adaptations. So if you're performing really fast-paced runs before your body's ready to do it, you're not exactly going to make any progress because your body can't catch up. So the main 3 things we're going to focus on are getting your early gear, finding your why, and then worrying about our pacing properly. Okay, quick intermission. I'm editing the video right now, and I had a couple more thoughts about finding your why. And just a quick little exercise that you can do that I have followed a few times that helps me find out is I want you to try and write down 5 things that you're really proud of, and then just look at it and try and reverse engineer what about those things you've done makes you proud. And eventually you'll kind of find those reasons as to why you want to do things, why you are proud of yourself for those things, and what got you to do them in the first place. So little tip, write it down. So I mentioned before that I wanted to talk a little bit about the physical adaptations that happen in your body, and the kinesiologist in me wants to do a full-length video about this, but I'll spare you guys for now and just kind of give you a general understanding of what's happening in your body when you exercise. So essentially, I'm looking at an article by Runner's Blueprint called The Physiology of Running: What Happens Inside Your Body. And this one's written by David Dack. I'll link it in the description too if you guys want to read the full article. It is really heavy, so I've just kind of screenshotted things and I'll go over them individually. But here at the beginning, it's not much that I wanted to really go through. But it does say, you know, this is kind of your guide field manual. And they're saying we'll cut through some myths about like lactic acid and your aerobic base, VO2 max. A lot of words that people have probably heard before, but a lot of them are hard to understand, like what they actually mean. And so the part that I wanted to look at was right here, where we talk about heart rate, stroke volume, and cardiac output. But right here, it talks about thinking of your heart as a fist-sized pump with one mission: get oxygen to your muscles. It does this by cranking 2 levers. So they talk about heart rate, which is how many beats per minute that your heart's putting out, and then stroke volume, which is the amount of blood that you're putting out per beat. And when you multiply those together, you get cardiac output. And so when you have a better cardiac output, you're able to produce more heart or more blood to your body in a certain amount of time, which you can imagine is really important when you're running a lot. When we get into strength training and running economy, which I'm going to talk a little more about strength training in a little bit, but they talk about more muscle is less waste. And I love this because I'm not a super skinny, kind of built for running type of guy. I've been into the gym forever. That's always been my thing. But it shows here, and it doesn't sound like a very big statistic, but doing heavy lifting and kind of plyometric type activities can help boost your running economy by 2 to 8%. And this is a lot more significant than it sounds. That's quite a bit of time off your race if you think about how long a marathon race is. And so doing things like working out and lifting heavy specifically will help you build up that tendon strength and that kind of elasticity that you need to have a better efficient muscle, because the stronger your muscles are, the less likely you are to get injured, and the easier you can move across the ground without having, wasted energy go into the ground. So when your tendons are really strong, that acts as kind of a spring to push you back up off the ground and makes your running more efficient. And another major reason why you need to take it slow in the beginning, worry about your pacing, is because your body takes a long time to get that tendon strength up. And if you're running too fast at the beginning, you have a higher chance of getting like muscle strains and stuff like that. So taking your time and really trying to build up that tendon strength and that resistance to injury is going to make you a lot happier in the long run. And then right here, we jump into the aerobic, aka oxidative system. And your aerobic system, I'm sure everyone's heard of aerobic cardio. It's basically any form of cardio where your heart rate is at a low enough pace where your body is primarily using fat as a fuel source rather than glucose, which I'm sure most people know, not everyone does, but glucose comes from carbs, sugars, anything that you think of like, oh, I need to eat carbs before I work out. That's true because you're putting out a lot of work and you're using anaerobic systems. But in running, you don't want to tap into a lot of that glucose because you're going to need it later in the race when you start to slow down on your fat absorption. So as you get less efficient at burning fat, you start to tap into these other fuel systems, and that's going to cause you to get exhausted faster because there's not nearly as much supply of things like glucose. Your body, even if you're really lean, has thousands of calories of fat to burn. And so if you can get really good at burning fat as a fuel source, your body is going to be able to run for a long time without getting exhausted. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about, and honestly probably the last thing I'll talk about here, is VO2 max. I do like how they say on here, the VO2 max is your aerobic engine capacity. So the max oxygen that your body can process per minute. And the reason that's so important is because as you get a better, heart rate and stroke volume and your overall cardiac output improves, if you're not carrying more oxygen in that blood that you're producing more of, you're not really getting all the benefits of having more blood. And so when you have a lot more capacity of your oxygen or of your blood cells carrying a bunch of oxygen, you can fuel your body for a longer time. That's where the kind of tempo runs and the speed training is helpful, is because it kind of makes you more efficient at carrying oxygen. But that entire process is not the biggest thing you should worry about. And overall, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover on adaptation. I could go on and on about this stuff. I think it's fascinating. And I'll be sure to link a couple articles so you guys can do your own research. But that's pretty much all I wanted to talk to you guys about that. So, all right, so earlier in the video, we talked about how gear is not super important in the beginning, but as you start to ramp up your training, you may want to try and ramp up your gear as well. So I've got everything laid out that I need for every purpose. I've got everything from running clothes to proper running shoes, ways to carry hydration, and then some optional things like some recovery gear that I personally recommend, but it can be kind of expensive, so you don't really have to go with that. But to kick things off, the number one things you gotta have, like we talked about earlier, some proper clothes to run in. I like these running socks, and I've got some moisture wicking clothes to make sure that all that sweat I'm gonna be producing is done and dusted by the end of the run. Then, of course, the most important part right here is your running shoes. And in earlier clips, I showed you guys my old running shoes. Yes, they're still okay, but they've got a lot of miles on it. So I upgraded to these. They probably have less than 100 miles on them, so they should last me all the way through training up into my actual marathon, and that's why I upgraded. And then ignore that. Another thing that I think is really important, and we've talked about it a little bit, is this running pack. And the reason I love this compared to like those hand water bottles, first of all, I'm a little OCD, so they kind of bother me. But the main reason I love this thing is because not only can you carry all the water in there, but you've got an extra pocket right here where you can carry some bars or gels, or if you're a real dog, you'll put some mandarins in there. And then over on this side, perfectly phone-sized pocket. I personally love it because I'm making content for you guys, so it fits right in there. And so that is probably my favorite piece of equipment I've gotten recently. And then when it comes to stuff that's kind of pricey, but I do recommend it, I just got myself one of these Garmin watches, And this thing has been incredible because I don't have to have my phone with me on runs anymore, because this thing's got its own built-in GPS. I can download music directly to it, which means, bang, I can bring my headphones with me and listen to music on my runs without having to lug around my phone, which is a great feeling, especially you've probably felt the pain in the gym or in other places. Your phone can be a pain in the butt. And then this one, I wouldn't exactly call essential, but I got it because I wanted more accurate data. This right here is a heart monitor. It uses electrodes to actually properly measure your heart rate. This is helpful because as you're running, the watch is moving around, so it's not going to properly measure your heart rate. So I do recommend that if you want really accurate data. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, which I don't 100% think is essential, but I do really enjoy having it, is first of all, these bands right here. I got these fairly recently because I have weak ankles and I've had hamstring problems in the past. So I just attach these to my bed frame. They're different stretchiness. This one's pretty light. This one is a little bit more medium. And this one is just enough to get some good like glute bridges or something like that, so you can activate your muscles. Those have been really helpful for injury prevention, and they're not too expensive at Dick's, so I do recommend it. This right here, a thrift store gold mine. Get yourself a foam roller. That's the one thing out of recovery stuff I 100% recommend. If you're not foam rolling, your muscles are going to be tight. They're going to be painful. Invest in one of these. I literally went to the thrift store. It was like $5. It's worth it. And then for the luxury item, I've got a Theragun that I bought years ago when I was in track in high school, and this thing is a beast. If you don't have a foam roller, but you have one of these, you'll be perfectly fine. This thing, absolute goldmine for recovery. And overall, this stuff is not that expensive. If you take the Theragun out of it, I've probably spent a total of $400 on all this, minus the watch, maybe $100. So as your training ramps up, invest in yourself, it'll be worth it. Now, there's a lot to unpack when it comes to nutrition, but it does not have to be complicated. Especially when training for a marathon, I've found 4 key concepts that I think will really help to master nutrition without having to think about it too much. Okay, the first concept is energy expenditure, and this one is really easy to master if you think of it as a fuel tank in your car. If you drive a pretty small car, no matter how much you use it, it's not going to be all that difficult. You're not going to have to spend that much money in order to maintain your fuel tank, in order to keep it up top. Because if you let it get too low, you run a risk of you burning out. It's the same as your body. As you train more and become a marathon athlete, you can begin to think of yourself more as a big semi-truck. You're going to have a large fuel tank to fill up, so you need to make sure you're keeping up with your body's energy needs. The second major key concept that I want you to understand is carbohydrate intake. And this will be the only part, I promise, that I use a little bit of numbers here. I want you to make sure that about 60 and upwards of 70% of your diet is consisting of carbohydrates. If you have dietary restrictions, I get that. You know more about your own body than I do. But when it comes to basic physiology and most people's average diet, the 60 to 70% range, depending on how heavy your training load is for that day, will be what you want to shoot for as far as what percent of all the food you're eating should be carbs. And this can include complex carbohydrates like pastas and potatoes and sweet potatoes, things that are high in carbs, but they digest a little slower. But it can also include plenty of simple sugars, like even for example, I had to buy these on my long run this morning because I realized I had not fueled myself enough. So even those quick little sugars will be immensely helpful to you. Next up, we've got protein. And protein is something that is overlooked by a lot of runners, I think. And I think it's because people assume when you're running a lot, you don't need to build muscle. But the more muscle you're able to maintain and keep on your body, you're gonna be better off and a more efficient runner, like we talked about earlier. And you need protein in order for your muscles to either stay or continue growing in order to make sure you're avoiding injury. So make sure you keep up on your protein intake. For a reference, if your carbs are 60 to 70%, try and keep protein, 10 to 20%. Okay, so the fourth overarching concept that I want you to understand is the importance of hydration. And I know hydration, nutrition, kind of the same thing, kind of not. But I believe hydration is just as important as all your nutrition. And I did not realize this to that degree of importance until I started going on more long runs. those are the days that will really test how well you're able to keep up with your hydration. Get yourself some electrolytes. They will help a lot. If you don't want to spend the money, just at a minimum, make sure you're adding salt to whatever foods you're eating that don't already have salt in them. That sodium is the number one electrolyte. You want to make sure you're keeping up on that. So all the things I just told you about nutrition are accurate, yes, but they only work if you're willing to stick to it in the long run. That's why you got to do things like this. We're heading out to In-N-Out to get a burger because I love In-N-Out.
Can I do a double plain, please?
You said double plain?
Yes, please.
All right, so the last big thing I wanted to talk about for this video is strength training. And you might be wondering whether or not strength training is worth your time. And I can say wholeheartedly, yes, it is. Please strength train, I'm begging you. And the main reason I say that is because yes, strength training is really good for injury prevention, and that is a huge reason why you should do it. Because if you have a stronger muscle, you'll be more resilient to getting injuries such as Achilles problems, having knee problems, any of these issues that result from having weak muscles around your joints. So if you're doing enough strength training, it doesn't have to be a lot, and you're strengthening all those muscles that surround your joints, all of a sudden, your joints don't have to work as hard for you to be able to run. And so that's one of the big reasons. But another huge reason is that when you're strength training properly, your body is going to require a lot less oxygen to go into your muscles in order to produce force. And as we talked about earlier, when you're training your body to produce more oxygen and you're training it to be more efficient with that oxygen, why wouldn't you do the same thing with your muscle cells? So if your muscles are getting stronger in the gym, they become more resilient. They're able to better utilize oxygen, so you don't have to have all that cardio go into your muscles. And you're going to be a stronger runner in general, which means you can put more force into the ground, which means you can run faster for longer, pain-free. So I 100% recommend strength training. And when it comes to the frequency of strength training, this can be kind of tough to do. It depends on your schedule. But for me, I've decided to do 2 days a week. And you could honestly do 1 day a week and be perfectly fine. I choose to do 2 days a week because I still enjoy lifting upper body, and it is healthy to do some upper body work and make sure your posture is good and you're able to work on things like your back, because your back can get kind of tight when you're running if it's not strong enough. But I break it up into 2 days. I have an upper day on Monday where I work on my whole upper body. And then I do a lower day on Tuesdays where I do a lot of kind of single leg work and strength work. But I'm gonna talk about that in just a second. But yeah, I recommend 1 to 2 days a week. You don't wanna overdo the volume. So if you're used to bodybuilding style training, you're gonna have to relearn how to work out. But I've got you covered on that. I'm gonna show you exactly what I do. So for this workout, I'm just gonna focus on the legs because any upper body work you do is gonna be beneficial. So honestly, just do whatever you enjoy. But I don't have any recordings of it, but I have a warm-up routine that I like to go through. And I can show everything up on the screen, but I like to go through a hip 90-90 circuit. Then I'll get some hamstrings warmed up with a walking hamstring scoop to quad pull. So I get both sides of my legs warmed up there. And then I'll jump into some walking front lunges with a side rotation. And once I'm finished with those, I will do some pivoted side lunges and some front leg swings and side leg swings just to get the blood pumping. Then after a couple warm-up sets, I like to do 4 sets of 3 on the back squat. And then I'll jump into some single leg RDLs where I'm gonna get 3 sets of about 6 per leg. And I'll do single leg squat with 3 sets of usually 6 to 8 on that as well. And for single leg squat, Bulgarian split squat type exercises work really well. And then another one is called a hip flexor sit-up. I can show you a video of this up on screen. It's 3 sets of 5 each leg for this, and this one will light up those hip flexors. And then I've got a single leg hamstring curl just to get more volume on those hamstrings, because running should be mostly your posterior chain. And then just to finish things off, I've got a Smith machine calf raise. I like to do 3 sets of 15 to 20 reps because you really want to burn it out here. And you want to make sure you do the calf raises in a standing position similar to when you're running. And then I finish things off with some form of abs. This week it was a cable pull-off hold, which I can show a video of that on screen as well because it can be, an interesting name. But yeah, overall, the goal of this workout was to maximize my strength capacity and then really focus on making sure that each leg is super strong because when you're running, you're only working one leg at a time, so you got to work on that strength. All right, so I just got back from what was supposed to be a 14-mile long run and turned out to be a 2.5-mile recovery walk. And the main thing I wanted to point out is that all the things that I've learned and tried to teach you throughout this video have helped me so much during this process of training for a marathon, and honestly through a whole process of just trying to push myself and build consistency and really just try and form into the person that I want to be. But it's not a perfect process, and nothing is. I didn't get very much sleep. I was pushing too much volume without any of that sleep, and it resulted in me having to skip my first run during training. And, you know, in the grand scheme of life, that's not a big deal. It does not matter. But, you know, when you set a big goal and you haven't missed one and you miss one big long run like this, it frustrates you. I think it's important to have perspective. You know, it's a beautiful, seriously beautiful sunny day in the middle or almost the end of January, and it was pretty warm, the sun's out, and I'm out on a walk. And maybe I'm not running 14 miles like I planned to be, but I am outside, I'm exercising, and I'm just happy to be alive. Nothing is a perfect journey, and no one's going to get everything right the first time. But this whole process has taught me that even though I have to settle down right now in order to prepare for future weeks of training, what I've learned through this entire week is that it's still worth it. Overall, this whole video, I really just want you to take away that pushing yourself to do something, whether you've thought about it or haven't thought about it, like a marathon, is a really fantastic way to completely change your mindset. And I believe that every single person who comes in contact with this video, you can do it. You know, anyone can. And I truly believe that. It may take a different amount of time. It may take a different journey than mine, but everyone is capable. And even if you have a different, bigger goal, I think you should chase it.
Hey guys, what's up?